Welcome to the 700 Club. Once again, Russia is threatening to launch a nuclear war against NATO nations. This time, it was discussed on state television. Experts showed what nuclear strikes against London, Paris, and Berlin could look like.
Well, meanwhile, in Mariupol, more than 100 civilian Ukrainians have finally been set free. Dale Hurd brings us the story.
In the battered Ukrainian port city of Mariupol, trapped civilians are finally being allowed to leave. New video shows Ukrainian civilians safely escaping after weeks of war. Women and children evacuated from that bombed-out steel plant with the help of the UN and the Red Cross. So far, 100 civilians have escaped. But as many as 1,000 civilians are believed to be still holed up inside, along with Ukrainian fighters, the last stronghold of resistance to the Russian siege against the city. The evacuees passed through Russian-controlled checkpoints before arriving at a Russian camp, on their way to meet with Ukrainian officials. Natalia, an employee at the steel plant, said the shelling was so strong and it kept hitting near us. I was afraid to even walk out and breathe some fresh air. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made an unannounced visit to Ukraine with a delegation of Democratic lawmakers over the weekend, meeting with President Zelensky and his aides for 3 hours late Saturday. Pelosi, the highest-ranking U.S. official so far to visit Kyiv, arrived just days after Joe Biden called on Congress to authorize $33 billion in military and humanitarian aid for Ukraine.
We leave with a firmer understanding and more current understanding of what needs to be done, with a deeper appreciation of inspiration from those who are in this fight.
And that fight may get bigger. Russia is sending the message again to NATO nations they face a possible nuclear attack. The Wall Street Journal reports the Kremlin is recasting its war in Ukraine as a broader war between Russia and the West, and seems to be preparing Russian civilians for a possible war with NATO. On the Russian program 60 Minutes, Vladimir Putin's state TV hosted a panel discussion with Russian experts on the feasibility of launching a nuclear attack against Western Europe. The influential journal Foreign Policy warns that Joe Biden's strategy to weaken Russia may be leaving Putin with no choice but to surrender or double down militarily, raising the possibility of turning the Ukraine war into a much wider one. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, this is obviously a very dangerous situation, and for them to be openly talking about launching nuclear weapons against the major capitals of Europe underlines how important our responses are. And to just casually say, we're aiming to weaken Russia is actually helping him in his own propaganda with his own people. If he can reframe this as not a war against Ukraine, but a war against the West and holding up Russian civilization and the greater Russia, then he will gain the political support he needs to continue the war. What other voices are out there is a very good question, because he seems to control absolutely everything. The state media, all the newspapers, anyone who critiques the war is whisked away and silenced. So we have to be very careful in how we deal with this situation, supporting Ukraine, but doing it in a way that doesn't threaten Russia. That's a very thin line to walk. And so how do we move forward here? If it does erupt into a nuclear war, that's a scenario that's absolute nightmare for everyone. That affects the whole world and sends us all back to the Dark Ages. That would be absolutely incredible. So let's pray. Let's pray specifically for our president, for everyone involved in foreign policy, everyone involved in the conduct of the war, all the NATO nations, their heads. We need to be very wise in how we proceed. Well, since the war in Ukraine began, refugees have been pouring into European countries like Poland. CBN's Operation Blessing has been there on the ground, providing them with food, water, and other essentials.
This is Daniel with Operation Blessing. We are now in the OB warehouse in Poland, and we are preparing a truckload full of different items, primarily food. We are sending these to Ukraine today, and they will be distributing these items during the week. We are sending some pasta, we are sending some rice, we're sending oatmeal, donations also that we have been receiving in the last week. Thanks for all your support, thanks for all your prayers. And this is a mixed truckload, primarily with food and some other essential items that will be really, really important to receive in Ukraine.
That's a video of our major effort in Poland, the warehouse, the trucking facilities. We want to supply a lot of different centers, a lot of different churches. Just if we can have the map of the Orphans Promise centers. Those are all the ones that have been in existence. Orphans Promise has been working in Ukraine now for over 20 years. Operation Blessing, more than 30 years. And you're supporting the supply of all these centers, plus other refugee areas, other churches that are being very active in supporting the refugees. It's all made possible because people like you care enough to give and say, I want to be a part of it. It's real easy. All you have to do is go to the phone and call us, 1-800-700-7000. Say, I want to give to the Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund. You can write to us at CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 23463. Just put Disaster Relief Fund on the memo line of a check. You can text OB Crisis to 71777, or you can go to cbn.com. Either way, do it now. This is going to be a long-term disaster relief effort. Even if the war were to end today, and we're looking at years of rebuilding in Ukraine, we want to be there. We want to help people in need. In other news, voters will go to the polls tomorrow for a major Republican primary in the key state of Ohio. Ephraim Graham has that story from the CBN Newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, it's a tight race in the Buckeye State with multiple candidates running to be the Republican nominee for the Senate in this fall's midterm elections. The hotly contested and widely watched battle has become the most expensive primary in the state's history. Polls show the race to be extremely tight. One key factor, former President Trump's endorsement of one of the candidates. CBN's Matt Galka has the story.
A crowded GOP Senate primary field in Ohio has prominent members of the party, including former President Donald Trump, taking different paths ahead of Tuesday's primary. And it could be a litmus test for how much power the former president still has.
I want to pick somebody that's going to win, and this man is going to win. Come on up, JD.
J.D. Vance, a former Trump critic, surprised many when he got picked from a packed GOP Senate field where many sought the former president's blessing.
The president is right. I wasn't always nice, but the simple fact is he's the best president of my lifetime.
Vance beat out former Ohio Treasurer Josh Mandel, businessman Mike Gibbons, former state party chair Jane Timken, and Ohio State Senator Matt Dolan in getting Trump's support. Each has traditional conservative stances on issues like the Second Amendment, abortion, and immigration. There are also other high-profile endorsements from the likes of Senator Ted Cruz for Mandel, Senator Rand Paul for Gibbons, and retiring Ohio Senator Rob Portman for Timken. But Dolan is now gaining some momentum by staying away from Trump and calling for the party to move forward and not look back.
So this is really a test of President Trump's political power within the Republican Party and within red states like Ohio, for example. And we'll also see that test play out in other states like Alabama and Pennsylvania, where President Trump has made endorsements that have somewhat divided the Republican Party.
Polls still show the Ohio primary as a toss-up, suggesting Trump's word might not be the final one when it comes to midterm elections.
What we're learning is that Trump's endorsement can be helpful in primaries, but it's not sufficient. It's not the only thing, and it's up to the candidates to take that endorsement and to turn it into fundraising dollars, to communicate that message to voters and to build on it rather than just rely on it.
The primary is expected to be very close, and since Ohio does not have runoffs, the winner just has to outdo the rest of the field. Matt Gelka, CBN News.
In a rare display of bipartisanship, the House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed the Stop Iranian Drones Act. It happened last week in a vote of 424 to 2. The bill is aimed at countering the threat from Iran's drones, which have been used to attack American troops in the last year, along with economic and political targets. Israel and other Middle Eastern countries have been taking on these drones, also known as UAVs or unmanned aerial vehicles. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, Israel is a world leader in fighting this menace.
This mission from March 2021 didn't make headlines or the nightly news, but it made history. 2 Israeli F-35 jet squadrons scrambled to intercept 2 Iranian drones heading for Israel.
This is a historic milestone for the Israeli Air Force that is a leader in the world and carried out the first UAV interception with an F-35 aircraft.
Historic and yet crucial for Israel's future survival. Dubbed 2 bridges, it marked the first use of the F-35s in this way.
Defending the skies of Israel is the first mission every pilot learns to carry out, and this was exactly the mission we took off for. We carried out an interception of 2 Iranian aircrafts that were aimed to infiltrate the state of Israel and to carry out hostile activities in Israeli territory.
The Shahad 197 drones have a wingspan of 22 feet and can fly more than 1,200 miles. That provides the ability to reach Israel and return to Iran. Iran has employed and increased this form of terrorism for several years by using the drones to collect intelligence, deliver munitions and supplies, while also launching attacks. According to an IDF intelligence officer, Iran is equipping and training its proxies, such as Hezbollah and Hamas, and the Houthis in Yemen, with these weapons. Seth Frantzman, author of Drone Wars, says there is more.
Iran's not just exporting the drones and the blueprints. It's bringing people into Iran, training them, and then sending them back. That means you have very skilled operators who can use drones to target ships or energy facilities or whatever they want.
It utilizes hundreds of these drones to target sites around the Middle East, like the high-profile attack on the Aramco oil processing facility in Saudi Arabia.
It shows us exactly what can be done with drones, even against an advanced power like Saudi Arabia that ostensibly has Western air defenses, and the drones were able to come in quite low and I think avoid radars, and were able to carry out pinpoint attacks.
And last summer's attack against the Israeli tanker Mercer Street. During last year's war between Israel and Hamas, Iran launched a drone from Iraq that was downed over the Jordan Valley. 4 years ago, Iran launched a Shahad 141 UAV from Syria. It reportedly carried explosives intended for delivery to terror groups in Judea and Samaria. A combat helicopter intercepted it inside northern Israel. As part of the negotiations for the Iran nuclear deal, a major concern is that sanctions will be lifted and the regime could funnel more money to its proxies. That, along with the specter of a nuclear Iran, would threaten global security. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And again, Israel leading the fight. Gordon?
Well, this has become a worldwide fight when you look at drone technology being used by various groups. So drug smugglers on our border with Mexico are using drones to deliver drugs across the border. Ukrainian forces are using commercially available drones. They're buying normal drones that are used for photography and using it to deliver explosives to Russian troops and blow them up. So here we have a state actor who is developing very sophisticated drones, and they're doing it with a very firm intent of wiping Israel off the map. And they're exporting that technology to Hezbollah, to Hamas. When you see Gaza written on the fuselage, that's the intent. They want to send these drones to Gaza so they can be launched into Israel and rain destruction over a civilian population. I applaud our government to say, let's stop this. Let's stop the export of this kind of technology. Let's realize what Iran is up to. They very much want to control the various straits. They want to control the oil supply coming out of the Middle East, and they want to wipe Israel off the map. We can't stand by and let them do it. We have to intervene, and we have to do so quickly.